Welcome to Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape Podcast. Hosted by Dr. Holly Krutka, Executive Director of the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. The show highlights SER's role supporting our mission to promote energy-driven economic development for the state of Wyoming.
Welcome back, listeners. Today, we're at the Wyoming Public Service Commission with the chairman, Mary Throne. And today, we're going to go back to that electricity sector and learn about the role of the Public Service Commission. So, Mary, thank you so much. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Holly, and thanks for having me.
So let's start today with your background. So you are a Wyoming native from Gillette.
That is correct.
Okay, so tell us about your roots in Gillette and your background in education.
So I grew up on a ranch west of Gillette. My grandparents on both sides of the family homesteaded in Campbell County in 1917. Grew up in a pretty isolated ranch environment, no TV. I did a lot of reading, and my parents never went anywhere because you can't leave the ranch. So
I'm going to tell my son, so people can survive without TVs.
Yes.
Okay, good to know. Keep going.
I mean, we had some TV.
Okay.
I was also in town during the school year, so I really wanted to go out of state to college. So I left Wyoming to attend college, law school, and to see the world, and worked in Denver for a few years, and then finally found my way back to Wyoming in 1992, and was the first air quality attorney for the Department of Environmental Quality, and that kind of became my professional niche. And I was there for 7 years and went into private practice.
Great. So you were in one of the early Leadership Wyoming classes?
Yes.
2002.
Right.
Is that right?
Second class.
Second class, 2002. So what did you take away from that experience that you'd like to share?
Leadership Wyoming is a tremendous program because I think it brings people together from all over the state and also different professional expertise, different personalities, different politics. I mean, it's really a mix of people. At the time I did it, I was in a class with people who'd either been sort of adversaries when I was at the Department of Environmental Quality, people on the other side when we were enforcing, or people who then became clients, but also like there were people from healthcare in the class. So I got out of the energy and the environmental sector and got to work with people and learn from people from all over the state.
That was one of my favorite things too. So I was in the class of 2022. So 20 years later.
Such a baby.
Oh, stop. But it is such an incredible program. And I think that is one of my favorite aspects is that how am I otherwise going to learn about healthcare in Wyoming? It's just there's no way for my path to really cross as a kind of holistic learning. You know, you have your own personal healthcare experiences. So I think it's so meaningful. And then you build those connections across the state that really stand the test of time.
Right.
So you were in private practice and then you were elected to the Wyoming legislature in 2006 and you served for 10 years.
Right.
And during that time, first of all, what made you want to run? And then we'll talk about some of the issues you worked on while in the legislature.
You know, I always had trouble answering the why I wanted to run question, but in the end, it was, because of my kids.
Yeah.
And originally I ran, I think, mostly to focus on education issues. At the time I ran, there were only a couple of us who were in the legislature who actually had children in the K-12 system. So my kids were 10, 8, and 5 when I ran. And the Wyoming legislature is just a special institution. I'd been involved in different ways long before I ran.
So in your career, you had also through DEQ and you were working on air quality at DEQ and private practice. You also had that tied to energy.
Oh, yeah.
And you worked on a lot of energy issues when you were in the legislature.
Yes. I also joke that if you're from Campbell County, you kind of learn energy from the cradle.
Right. Energy capital of the nation.
And my dad always had this great line that mineral-fed cows do better than grass-fed cows. I use that line all the time.
I love that. So speaking of which, so a lot of Wyoming has really foundational legislative framework for things like pore space management. So the empty space in rocks where oil can be stored or CO2 can be stored or oil can be produced while CO2 is stored, all different things. Wyoming really is on the front edge and has been, and other states look to Wyoming for our regulatory and legal framework around these issues. And some of that foundation, that like early framework, was laid while you were in the legislature. Can you talk about that and why and how the legislature became focused on that issue during your time?
Oh, that was probably one of my best legislative experiences, and it happened when I was a freshman.
Oh.
So the Supreme Court ruled in Massachusetts v. EPA that EPA had to consider whether greenhouse gases were a pollutant under the Clean Air Act. And that Supreme Court decision and things that were happening on the West Coast to states where we export our power led Tom Lubnow from Gillette, who was incidentally a high school friend of mine, gotta love Wyoming, to really take the lead in making sure that Wyoming had a framework for carbon capture and sequestration. And you have to remember that was kind of early in this whole process. And he certainly took a lot of heat for leading that effort. So what the legislature did was set up a select committee to deal with all the different issues. And I was pretty lucky to be put on it as a freshman, and it was because of my environmental law background.
And I think it's really interesting. So fast forward, today we're actually having community meetings about real projects that are going forward in the state, and other states are copying what you and those that followed you have done in terms of the regulatory side. It's really been cutting edge, and so it was very visionary.
Yeah, and I don't take credit for the vision, and also we used to always say in the legislature there's no I in legislature, but the one bit that I did specifically contribute to that effort that I do take pride in is the framework for the Class 6 approval. Because as we originally started discussing it, the authority for the Class 6 wells was going to be with, and they weren't called Class 6 at the time, was going to be with the Oil and Gas Commission. And to me, that didn't make sense. So that part of the statute was my amendment in the committee to put that whole process into DEQ.
So for anyone not familiar, Class 6 is the type of permit you need for a well that's dedicated to CO2 storage permanently. So why did you think it fit better at DEQ?
Well, because I thought it was more waste disposal than really related to oil and gas. And DEQ had and they permit injection wells at the Oil and Gas Commission, but it's mostly tied to the oil and gas industry. Right. And I saw this as becoming broader. Also, I think based on my years of experience at watching the Environmental Protection Agency, I thought we were down the road. It took a long time, that we were more likely to get approval from the federal government if we did it under the DEQ framework.
Great. And I would say, at the School of Energy Resources, we obviously have led and continue to lead and work with industry on a lot of projects around carbon storage, carbon dioxide storage, and have great working relationship with DEQ. So really appreciate that. And also with OGCC, of course, they approve the permits, the Class 2 permits that you need if you're going to store CO2 via enhanced oil recovery. So lots of great entities around the state working together on these issues.
Yeah. And I know just enough about the Safe Drinking Water Act. Dangerous. So
great. Well, I know less than that. So anything else you want to mention about your time in the legislature? Any policies that you're particularly proud of, or legislation you're particularly proud of?
Well, lots of things. More, not really so much in the energy sector. I tried to actually avoid energy issues, at least like in terms of, risking client conflicts and things like that. For example, I never served on minerals. It was sort of interesting that I got put on this committee, the select committee, in the beginning. But I tried to bring my expertise on regulatory matters to the floor, and I think I eventually earned the respect from frankly, some of my crotchety older male colleagues who were skeptical because of my political party, but also skeptical because I was a woman. Mm-hmm. And I still remember the day when former Representative Tom Lockhart actually on the floor referred to me as a subject matter expert.
Fabulous. And you are. So from all that, what kind of inspired you to run for governor in 2018?
Well, I think being a child of Campbell County and understanding the history of Wyoming, I could see that the energy sector was changing and changing dramatically, and that we had to think about that.
Well, and now here you are at the Public Service Commission, so still very much tied into the energy sector and what's changing there. So just to make sure, let's do a little bit of background, like 101 PSC.
Sure.
PSC 101. So
I do have to go back to the governor's situation.
Okay, go ahead.
Quickly. I love telling the story nationally.
Please do, yeah.
That only in Wyoming can, you run against somebody for governor and then they give you a job.
Perfect. Well said. Yes. So let's start there. So you come to serve on the Public Service Commission and now you're chairman, and that is a gubernatorial appointment.
Right. Although the chairman's elected by the other two commissioners.
Gotcha. So let's talk about back to the PSC 101, so Public Service Commission. What is the role of the PSC here in Wyoming?
So the Public Service Commission is actually a very old agency. We were established in 1915. We're actually planning a little party for our 110th anniversary in March. And the idea of public service commissions generally is that there are certain businesses, certain services that are natural monopolies, and utilities are a natural monopoly, meaning that you don't want a lot of them around. The barriers to entry, the duplication of services are natural monopolies, but you need to regulate them. So the Public Service Commission, and this really, the fundamentals of utility regulation have to adapt to changing circumstances, but those fundamentals go back 100 years.
And when you say regulate, there's different types of regulation. Right. You're talking about which type?
We're economic regulators.
Right.
So we are supposed to theoretically stand in as a surrogate for the market and to ensure that rates, utility rates, electricity is the hot topic now, but it used to be more natural gas, a little bit of telecom, which is mostly deregulated now. Those are the big three that we regulate, and a couple of small water utilities. Most of the discussion today happens in the electricity space. Mm-hmm. And so our job is to ensure adequate, safe, and reliable service at just and reasonable rates. And just and reasonable does not mean cheap. Utilities are entitled to recover their costs and also have the opportunity to earn a return. And I want to emphasize the word opportunity to earn a return on their investment. So we want to keep them financially stable enough and give them that opportunity so they can attract capital to build what we need.
That was very thorough. Great 101. And I mean, I think of another simple way of thinking about it just for the electricity sector that you regulate is there is a set of power plants. There's an electric grid that's transmission and distribution that gets the electricity to our houses. And for there to be competition, true competition, you would have to duplicate all that, which would make it really expensive.
No, that's it exactly.
And hence why
that's a better explanation than I gave. Well,
it's because that's the level of depth that I understand it. So tell me about the PSC in terms of its operation. So how big is the staff? How is it organized?
So we have 3 commissioners, all appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate. We have 6-year terms. They're staggered. And I think of us as functioning sort of as a 3-member court. We're independent of each other. I'm not the boss of the other 2, definitely not the boss of the other 2. We deliberate, we make our decisions in public. So we can't discuss cases with each other except process outside of a public setting. The commission has a staff of 35, and that includes mostly technical staff or professional staff. We have lawyers, we have engineers who do actually a lot of safety inspections. That's another part of our job. We have finance people, accountants, economists, and a thin layer of support staff. So we function somewhat like a court, an administrative court. We have dockets. People file cases, they file applications, and then we adjudicate those. A lot of them don't go to hearing, like in a trial situation, but...
And what's your funding model?
So our funding model is a utility assessment, and the legislature approves our budget, and then we have an assessment on utilities.
But it's not...
It's in the statute.
From the general fund, the taxpayers?
No, we don't have general fund money.
Great.
We have a little bit of federal money.
Okay. So let's keep going down that road of understanding the electricity provision and the responsibility of the PSC around electricity. So first of all, just really broadly, how would you describe the current status of electricity in Wyoming?
We sort of joke in our regional commissioner meetings that it's kind of like everything everywhere all at once. There is just a lot happening in the electricity space. And as you well know, Wyoming is an energy exporter. And so that raises a whole host of complicated issues when it comes to electricity, because a utility operating in Wyoming that exports to other states, they have to meet the requirements of those states as well. And whether those are environmental requirements or they face a lot of competing policy interests.
Yeah. We do have to compete with others, especially when utilities are looking to invest. The other thing is, last month we had Cindy Crane, CEO of Pacific Corp, on the podcast, and she was talking about how essentially the system is kind of at, I don't know if at capacity is the right word, but like no one's long on generation. Transmission would be needed if new generation is built. Is that the case here as well?
Yes. So I think to step back, and I had a lot of energy experience, like 30 years of energy experience, or maybe a lifetime of energy experience.
You're from Gillette, from the cradle.
From the cradle when I took this job. But the complexities of electricity and electricity generation were new to me. I mean, I think in Wyoming, if you think about it, look at Jim Bridger or Dave Johnston. We built big, huge power plants. They went into rate base. You connected them to where they needed to go. And that wasn't intensely complicated. I'm oversimplifying. I'm sure there were complexities. And then now the electricity grid is changing. The generation mix is changing. So it's not a couple of big baseload things like power plants, but a lot of variable resources. That's been happening, for a decade or more. And that really changes how the grid functions. And I'm not going to go too far into that because then we get into physics and engineering. But it's just a completely different dynamic. And when I first started, I think there was a belief among many that we could just transition this grid to all renewables and everything would be hunky-dory. And I'm happy to say that I think just in the few years that I've been in this job, that has changed. People are much more realistic. I'm sort of rambling
like
on.
Everybody, but yes.
No, but I think in my world of even among commissioners from states with avidly pro renewable policies, we all know that the grid has to be stable. That's just physics. That's not politics.
Right.
And so I think that's a piece that's shifted in a good way, that people are being a little more realistic. Then on top of that, we have the extreme events, the wildfires, all of those things. And so we felt pretty busy. And now we have tremendous load growth, which I think is what Cindy was talking about.
Yeah.
And how you deal with all of these things together, and they're really regional issues, which has also been a part of the job I didn't anticipate, but that I really enjoy meeting with other commissioners. Every state has got a commission, and usually it's like 3 people or 5 people. And there's just a lot of collegiality among the Western commissioners as we problem solve together.
And that's a great point you brought up. So you almost can't turn on the news without hearing about load growth, maybe indirectly through hearing about AI and data centers and electrification and all these different things that are all of a sudden changing the trajectory of electricity consumption in the U.S. It's been declining or at least flat around most of the country. And I'm curious, how would you answer a question about, like, is Wyoming ready to serve large load requests like that?
No.
Are we ready? No.
But no one else is either. And I think, and we're just starting really to dig into the load growth. Load growth was not the hot topic at commissioner meetings even a year ago. It was wildfire. Yeah. And, we still have the wildfire issue.
Yeah.
And now the load growth is, how do we deal with it? Can we do creative regulatory structures to address some of the concern, which we've done in Cheyenne?
Yeah. So talk about that. Like, what's the commission's role in ensuring that projects that want to locate in Wyoming that are going to be large electricity consumers can get the electricity they need? Like, how does the PSC fit into that?
Well, it's sort of evolving. In Wyoming, as you know, we tend not to be a heavy regulatory state. The commission tends to react to ideas that come to us from the utilities. And so that's, I believe, it's my understanding, I wasn't here, how we developed the tariff that data centers in Cheyenne have taken advantage of through Cheyenne tariffs. Tariffs are just like rules, contracts. So every utility has a tariff. It's sort of an archaic term. You don't hear about tariffs a lot, but in the utility world, they're everything. And those are the terms of service and the rates, the rules that utilities operate under. And we approve those and they're filed with us. I guess I didn't really explain that in the 101 bit. But in any event, Cheyenne Light has a large power contract tariff that Microsoft has taken advantage of, and Meta. And our job is to make sure that they can do that without shifting costs to the other ratepayers.
Exactly.
In terms of, I think we can work to ensure regulatory flexibility that allows solutions to happen. But we've certainly been under pressure to try and, I think, and the utilities are under pressure to solve the problem, because I think there's a concern. I know there's a concern because former legislators have bugged me about it at receptions about the need to be able to respond to these opportunities.
Yeah,
and it's a work in progress.
Folks really want to know that, like, a data center coming into Wyoming isn't going to increase my electricity bill at my house. So I think that's a really important role. So another area that has been kind of a hot topic lately is what's called non-utility generation. So first of all, explain what is non-utility generation?
Well, we initiated a rulemaking to maybe clear up some ambiguities, this way I look at it, in what we regulate. So the definition in the statute of a public utility is to or for the public. So the question is, what's the public? Can one customer be the public? And there's like a variety of cases out there that don't really, in my opinion, answer the question. And so we were initiating a rulemaking to maybe clarify when entities that might have been in the ambiguous area, and it was a legislator who came to us mainly concerned about possibilities for nuclear generation that wanted to clear up the ambiguity. So if a small modular reactor operator wanted to serve 2 people in Latrona Patch as opposed to just 1, would that make them a public utility? And I think we had a question as to whether it would. And it likely would. Yeah. I mean, we have pipeline carriers with 1 customer. And the question is, under the Supreme Court case laws, are they so clothed with the public interest that we should regulate them? Well, that is in the eye of the beholder. So we initiated this rulemaking maybe to clarify that, and we encountered a lot of resistance. And because the utilities, part of the natural monopoly is they have a certificated territory, and they're entitled and obligated to serve in that certificated territory. So there was concern, especially among the rural cooperatives, that we'd be peeling off, that this process would allow large customers to not be there for them. So we've taken a step back, and we're going to, I hope, come up with a rule that we can get more consensus on.
So it's still in process.
It's still in process. So we did not adopt the rule that had been out for public notice, and we haven't really set a timetable for going back to that topic. But I think it's something we need to look at. So self-generation, we don't regulate.
Right. And by that, you mean like if you were a large industrial customer,
right.
If you were making your own electricity for your own consumption, that has nothing to do with the PSC.
Right.
But as soon as you sell it to somebody else,
then there's an issue.
And you are, that's what you're kind of looking at
right.
now. Okay. So this is kind of a hot potato question.
I love hot potato questions.
Oh, good. Oh, perfect. Then you're going to love this. So we have seen, well, let me start by saying Wyoming has very, very low electricity costs. If you look across the nation,
yes,
we are just continually one of the lowest cost states in terms of electricity production. Now, we have seen some significant rate increases and proposals for significant rate increases. What do you think is behind those? What do you think is causing that?
Well, a lot of things. First of all, utilities face the same inflation that we all face. And so when their costs go up, again, it's the basic model. They're entitled to recover their prudently incurred costs. And we review everything to make sure what they're doing is prudent and in the public interest. So we can reject costs.
So you're allowed to look at what's causing all these costs.
Oh,
like
yeah.
The fuel and everything.
Not allowed, but obligated. Required.
Yeah, okay.
And they're required to open up their books for us. It's in the statute. We have broad authority to review those records and decisions of utilities. That's our job. But also, going back to the whole energy transition discussion, I think that everybody was naive and probably a little misleading to the public.
Yeah. The public was misled.
That leaders were misleading. Sorry, I'm stumbling here. The leaders misled the public or were themselves naive, I think, in thinking that you can build all of this stuff and completely change how you provide electricity to people and not cause costs to go up. That's just not how the system works. Because when they invest in generation, when they invest in transmission, if it's necessary to serve, they're entitled to recover their costs.
Yeah.
Plus, we also had aging infrastructure.
Sure.
So if you're going to replace it, it's going to cost money.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. Even with environmental rules, with inflation, building anything new almost just costs more than what we have. And it is, power plants do age out eventually. So,
and it's a supply and demand issue. And now we're talking about more demand.
Yeah, more demand. So do you think the rate increases are a near-term issue, or do you think they'll continue?
Oh, that's a very good question. And we, to be careful because we always have something pending and I can't talk about pending things. I think there's going to be continued upward pressure on rates for probably at least 2030. I mean, the situation is not stable right now.
Right.
And the complications posed by weather events and how you protect against those and what you have to do to deal with increasing risk of wildfire on top of pressure to decarbonize the grid. Those are not low-cost efforts.
Well, thank you for that. So I guess we'll see where it goes.
But I think relative to other states, Wyoming's are still going to be...
It's still going to be low here.
It's still going to be lower.
That's great to hear. So what other issues have we not talked about that are kind of pressing issues facing the PSC today?
We haven't talked a lot about, I think, the opportunities for Wyoming and reliability. We have a lot of regional groups that we participate in. We haven't talked about the push for a regional market in the West. We don't take a position on that, but we monitor that. So there's just a lot going on in the Western interconnection, which is I guess we didn't even define that. That's basically the Western states plus British Columbia and Alberta.
Okay. Where does it start in Western states?
Well, we have a little bit of South Dakota, a little bit of Nebraska, and then Montana, west, it goes south. Texas is its own beast.
Yes.
So everything west from basically there.
Got it.
And we have reliability pressures in the West. That's a group that I participate with pretty actively. I'm the chair of the Western Interconnection Regional Advisory Body, which is a Federal Power Act designation. But I think reliability presents opportunities for Wyoming. That's a niche that we can fill. The work that you do at the School of Energy Resources with carbon capture. We now seem to have a consensus that rapid transition is destabilizing the grid. So the groups that monitor reliability, which is WEC in the West and then NERC federally, have kind of sounded the alarm that policy moving too quickly is a risk to reliability. And I think that creates opportunities for Wyoming, whether it's in the carbon capture space. Rocky Mountain Power, in what they call their preferred portfolio, generation portfolio, has recently included carbon capture on Jim Bridger 3 and 4 as part of their preferred portfolio. That doesn't mean absolutely it's going to happen, but that's a shift. So I think that concern about reliability presents opportunities for Wyoming. Also advanced nuclear. I think we need to start seeing those things as opportunities instead of challenges. We're an energy exporting state.
Right.
We have reliable power.
We do. We also have to look at what our customers outside the state borders want.
Exactly. And, it's market driven. We don't have enough people in Wyoming to use all the power that we can generate.
Not even close.
And we never have.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I was running for governor, I looked up, and I can't remember the numbers, but I looked up the population in Campbell County the year I was born. And always a risk for a history major to do math. But if Wyoming had grown at the same rate as Campbell County, we'd have over 1 million people in the
state.
It
did not happen.
It did not happen.
But man, there's a lot of energy coming out of Campbell County.
Yes.
So are there any misconceptions about the PSC or the utility sector broadly that you want to dispel?
Oh, quite a few, but I'll just
pick your top.
Mention a couple. The utilities are companies, they're businesses. Even, the co-ops are nonprofits. But they all are entitled to recover their prudently incurred costs. Just and reasonable rates does not mean cheap. And part of our role as the PSC is also to monitor the financial stability of the utilities. We don't want them to become unstable. We don't want them to drift towards bankruptcy. So it's a balancing act. So we can't guarantee no rate increases. We can only say that we're going to scrutinize those rate increases to determine whether they're just and reasonable and in the public interest. That's what we do. But we can't guarantee no future rate increases. We can only guarantee that we're going to look carefully at everything.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for all that. It's really been enlightening. The utility sector is very confusing if you're not really in it, even for those of us that are really energy people. So really appreciate you shining light on all this. For our last question, we're going to shift gears. We always do. But this might be a hardball for you. So what is your favorite place to visit in Wyoming?
Well, I don't know if it qualifies as visiting, but my favorite place in Wyoming is my family's, I should say. My brother gets mad when I try to claim it as my own. My little spot on Wild Horse Creek, west of Gillette. And I think I can say this without getting emotional now, but I'm also particularly attached to it now because it all burned last summer.
Oh, gosh.
So, there are a lot of gorgeous places in Wyoming, but that is my personal favorite.
That's great. Well, Commissioner, Chairman Mary Throne, thank you so much for all you've done for Wyoming over the years, for working with us at the School of Energy Resources, and for doing this podcast.
Well, it's been a lot of fun, and we appreciate all that you do for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape, the podcast that highlights the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. You can expect a new episode of Energy Frontier every Wednesday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. See you next time.